What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with Ultimate Endgame issue number 3. And this is one of those comics where, depending on where you stand, either you're fine with what happens, or you are pissed, or you're kind of caught off guard. But the reality is that this is one of those very divisive comics that Marvel's released in recent years. There are a couple phrases here on the first page that I've blocked out because to reveal those is to spoil what happens. But what this does is this picks up in the aftermath of Tony Stark essentially having to destroy his father. The reason being because Tony's in possession of an Immortus engine. Why does that matter? Immortus engines are time travel devices. It's one of the things that we learned at the very beginning of all this when Hickman first kicked off the new Ultimate Universe, as short-lived as it seems to be. Those who have an Immortus engine can control all of space and time. The Maker is here in the city. As a quick little bit of a refresher here, right? One of the things to keep in mind is that at the end of Ultimate Invasion, going into Ultimate Universe number 1, the Maker and Tony Stark's father were locked away inside the city. It was supposed to open after 2 years. That 2-year window has passed. The Ultimates have entered into the city. Now they're essentially stuck here. But because time passes differently inside the city itself, at this point in time, Howard Stark and the Maker have basically been fighting for eons. And while a kind of stalemate had been secured, the reality is that the entrance of the Ultimates introduced an unstable element. In effect, they provided a means for the Maker to be able to locate Howard Stark, who for the most part has just kind of stayed hidden. More so than that, the city is the Maker and the Maker is the city. They're all kind of one and the same. And that's what's going on with all these henchmen, right, that the Ultimates are fighting. They're basically facsimiles of the Maker himself. He literally turned himself into a kind of gas form that in turn imbued everybody, which is part of the reason why everyone in the city, or most everybody in the city, is part of the Maker. But with Tony Stark having to destroy his father in order to keep himself from dying with the loss of the Immortus engine, now he's just kind of in a fugue state, right? He's just sitting there dealing with everything that's going on. And that's why America Chavez says, Tony, get your head together. We're all going to die. And the response of Venom, right, we're all going to die anyway. And Peter's just like, I hate when I'm right. But the point is, you switch over to Richard Parker, right, the son of Spider-Man, talking to Mary Jane Watson. And she's just kind of screaming at him, right? You know, sorry might have worked the first time that you snuck out, Richard, but not the 5th. And that's where he tells her, I made it this time. But there was a pack of velociraptors that basically tried to attack me, and ultimately that's the reason why I'm late, right? And that's where she just says, you could have died out there. You are not in the city anymore. And that's where Richard just says, I should be in the city. I should be with Dad. Now, this is one of the things to keep in mind about what's been happening, right? We long saw a while ago in the Ultimate Spider-Man comic that they now reside in the Savage Land. It's essentially a base of operations, but the Savage Land, instead of existing down in Antarctica like it does in the main Marvel Universe, that instead it exists under the city of New York, but it is still a safe haven from everything going on the surface. And we'll talk about that here in a second, because Mary Jane just kind of keeps screaming at her son a little bit, right? Like, you're just a child, right? You are my child, and I want you where it's safe. And that's kind of the funny thing, is Richard responds kind of the way that you would expect him to, given everything that's going on, right? Where he says, so we're just supposed to stay here and hide, right? All that crap about responsibility, community, integrity, all that was crap, wasn't it? And she just tells him language, but that's a fair argument to make, right? You can't really on one hand instill in Richard Parker the idea that you have to learn to care about others more than you care about yourself, and then at the same time say the smart thing for us to do is hide. On a moral level, it doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense, but at the same time, Richard's young. The reality here is that when you are a child, right, your prefrontal cortex doesn't really develop, or at least fully, until you're like 25. So recklessness and impulse control and all that kind of stuff, that's still very much a part of your life. I simply just say that to say, for someone like Richard going up there onto the surface and getting involved in the conflict, he would likely get himself killed. And that's the one thing that Mary Jane is so concerned about here. And that's why she tells him, there are other ways to fight, right? I have spent the last 3 months verifying and summarizing the thousands of pages of Altnet documents for the public. That matters too. Why don't you help us? Now, that's an important thing, right? Because in that moment, J. Jonah Jameson says, our stories are reaching millions of people. And Uncle Ben tells him, you will have a bigger impact here than anywhere out there. And that's an accurate statement to make, right? The reality here is that when you're trying to change the world, it's much easier to reach as many people as humanly possible with a positive message on how the world can be changed. People usually put up defenses, right, when you try to use some kind of a negative message. And so one of the things to notice here is that in all the efforts that have been happening, really going all the way back to the Ultimate Spider-Man comic, as well as during Ultimate Endgame, is that what's been happening is J. Jonah Jameson and Ben Parker have had their own newspaper, and they're trying to speak truth to power, and they're successfully doing it. And the reason why is because while the Illuminati are a very powerful force and have been manipulating the world behind the scenes, the reality here is that a lot of people are very dissatisfied with the lives they lead. All they've been waiting for is some catalyst, some kind of a spark to ignite that sets it all off. And that's what the Ultimates pulled off, right? When they basically created Altnet and they told anybody who wants to be a part of it, you can be an Ultimate too. It gave people an ideology to rally around, and that allowed people to unify in a way that hasn't quite been done. And that's why when Richard asked, right, how are you guys even still online? Why hasn't the paper been taken down yet? And in fact, J. Jonah Jameson responds to this. He says, to be honest, we've wondered that ourselves, right? With their technology and their tactics, they should have come for us long before the article first went live. And that's when Ben just says, it's like we've had a guardian angel watching over us. And that's when Vision appears. Now, Vision has been part of the Ultimates for quite some time. Of course, Vision is a woman in the Ultimate Universe, but it's cool because honestly, Vision uses her powers in a really interesting way, right? She kind of chimes in and says, that's one way to look at it. Now, the funny thing is, no one really knew that she was active in doing this, right? That's why Uncle Ben and these guys are kind of caught off guard. And she just says, I am the Vision of the Ultimates. I have long admired your journalism and have been shielding you from hand censors. I have quite a lot of influence on the internet. And so Jameson, of course, the most trustworthy person you could possibly imagine, is just like, so what do you want? A thank you? And she says, no, right? I want to update you. The paper reaches many who have not yet joined our network. An informed public is vital to our project. That's an accurate statement, right? Those in power, the one thing they fear the most is a united public and an informed public, because an informed public knows what right decisions to make, and they know whether or not they're being lied to, if the wool's being pulled over their eyes. And that is what's been happening in the Ultimate Universe. It's also what's been happening in the real world, but that's what's been happening in the Ultimate Universe here. It is those in power lying to people without power, hoping that they just either never open their eyes to see what's going on, they write off those individuals who are reporting what's going on as conspiracy theorists, or they're too afraid to act. And that's where Ben says, I don't care what you've done for us. The paper is not some propaganda outlet. We do not print anything. We do not corroborate ourselves. But that's the kicker, is Vision says, of course, Mr. Parker, because it's one thing to simply just be told something by someone. It's another to be able to follow up and to verify that it's true. It's like what Mysterio said in Spider-Man, right? These days, people need to believe, and they will believe anything. And that's what Vision is pointing at, and that's what Ben Parker is pointing at. Give us proof. And so that's why Vision says, following DaCosta and the Society's defeat and withdrawal from the Northern American Union, our focus has been on the coast. Fantastic Force units have been systematically dismantling the Children of the Light in the West, which, by the way, I still love the idea that the Fantastic Force is here. Essentially, Doctor Doom's Fantastic Four, right? Created in the Ultimate Comics. Of course, one of the things we mentioned is that Fantastic Force is a throwback to the old Marvel Comics that had Franklin Richards as a member of his own superhero team. But Vision continues on. While Ultimates, Shen Qi, and Danny Rand have been fomenting a non-violent peasant uprising in heaven, dividing the Incredible Hulk's forces and attention. Outside the Union, Ultimate's membership is smaller, the Council's hold is stronger, though local unaffiliated actors have had some success in some territories. Now, that's one of the other parts of this new Ultimate Universe, and in a lot of ways, it's one of the things that fans were kind of frustrated about. There was some world building, but the world building wasn't really done in the way you would expect it to be done in the main Marvel Universe, right? Here's cosmic entities, here's various alien races that exist out there, and all that kind of stuff. You kind of got that to a degree, but the world building was very, very limited, and it was only really done as far as what needed to be done to progress the story. And so while we did learn about things like Eurasia, and we learned that the X-Men don't really exist in the traditional sense that Xavier's long since gone. Jean Grey's brain was being used by Colossus, his sister Magic, and Omega Red before Wolverine killed him in order to basically control Wolverine when he was the Winter Soldier and other people who operate under Department X. There wasn't really a whole lot of other exploration out there. Now, truth to tell, when we're talking about world building within Marvel Comics, we're also talking about world building that's been happening since the introduction of the Fantastic Four. So I don't quite know you could achieve the same level of world building that's been happening over 60, 70 years within the span of like a 2-year window. But you guys understand what I'm talking about, right? Like there's a difference between building a world out of necessity based on the story and building a world because you can. But that's where Vision continues on, right? And Hino Kuni, a youth movement of so-called mutants, has been troubling Emperor Sunfire. And that's when we get in to the Ultimate X-Men, which honestly, we have not covered in quite some time. Now, these two people that we're seeing here are May and Cannon. And here's the funny thing. Cannon is essentially Quanon, right? Psylocke from the new Ultimate Universe. May is actually a whole new character for the Ultimate Universe. She's dope. She actually has kind of an obsession for like Eric Killmonger in Storm, which we'll talk about here in a second. But one of the big things that they had been doing was basically leading what measure of a revolt they could against Sunfire within Japan. Now, initially their story started off relatively innocuous, kind of learning about themselves, what they were capable of, and all that kind of cool stuff. But as the story progressed, it became a lot more serious. I will say, Ultimate X-Men from Peach Momoko has been nothing short of one of the greatest X-Men runs in the history of Marvel, which makes me kind of ashamed to say because we have not covered it. And I feel like we've been doing a huge disservice to that comic by not covering it. You should 100% read it. But what matters is this, right? May says, I'm telling you, I saw her. I saw Hee-chan there in Latveria. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Now, the person she's talking about is Hisako, Armor, right? And that's the crazy thing, is in Ultimate X-Men issue number 12, there was a whole story arc that I won't go into because we're probably going to cover it, but basically, she's been MIA for pretty much this whole time. But that's what the whole conversation is, right? Like, you're cracked, May. All we saw in that video was a red blur. But that's where May's like, no, I saw her. Like, I know for a fact it was her. And that's where the question's asked. If there's any chance that Armor is alive, we have to go. And that's where they all kind of agree that needs to be done. So this is kind of the rest of the team showing up in the ultimate Endgame threat, which kind of makes sense, right? Everything's sort of consolidating down into the city, but that's where Vision continues on, right? We have been monitoring the situation, preparing to support and maximize the impact of their efforts. I'm afraid there has been no news from inside or around the city. We've lost contact with anyone who gets close. I'm sorry, but I'm sure they're all okay. Now, this is the other part of the equation. It's what the Ultimate X-Men aren't really prepared for, because keep in mind, all those individuals within Latveria, right, who are surrounding the city have all basically been turned into zombies, which again is also a reference to the original Ultimate Universe in Marvel Comics. And so they're essentially showing up to confront a force that they are not overly familiar with. But that's when you jump back to Tony Stark in the city, and that's where he's told, basically by the Maker, is this all that you sent? Is this all that you could muster? Not much, are you? I expected more, somehow. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is because one of the things to remember about the Maker is that when Maker's talking to Tony Stark here in the Ultimate Universe, he's also thinking about the version of Tony Stark from the main Marvel Universe. Because remember, Maker has experienced both versions. And that's why he's always kind of taunted Tony in some form or another, right? You are nothing like the Tony I would expect, right? Different statements like that. Because you would expect Tony to basically be a genius, and even if it's only just an alcohol-induced haze, some kind of a hero within the Marvel Universe when you're not talking about the main Marvel Universe version. And that's why the Maker says, already I am beyond your comprehension. All of this is so small. And Peter chimes in, right? I knew all that swinging around skyscrapers would come back to haunt me. I've had nightmares like this. And the Maker says, you came here to fight, but how do you fight everything? The ground beneath your feet, the air in your lungs. I am all around you. I am inside of you. And that's where you pick up with Dr. Doom. Because Dr. Doom says, we understand all of this is an extension of the Maker, which makes this quite satisfying because he starts destroying little bits of the Maker. Lest we forget, Dr. Doom is Reed Richards in this universe who was twisted into becoming Dr. Doom by the Maker. And that's where Venom chimes into Peter and says, I could help if you just asked. And Peter says, I'm asking, right? This is me asking. And Venom's just like, was that so hard? And just like manifests. Which I love the way that that's done, right? It's absolutely phenomenal the way that's handled. But again, the Ultimates start figuring out how to defeat the Maker's forces. And that's where Peter kind of shows back up, right? What did you do? And America Chavez just says, what Deathlock told me to do, right? I attacked with a specific frequency of cosmic energy that they were vulnerable to. And so, of course, that's where Doom asks the question, like, how in the world do you understand her, right? And America's like, I don't know, I just listened. Which is kind of weird, because it's almost like Groot in Rocket Raccoon, right? This Deathlock just is like, rah, 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 right? But America Chavez understands her anyway. But it makes no difference whatsoever, because the Maker shows up here on the scene and says, so did I. I hear everything, even your thoughts. Right now, you're thinking, this is hopeless. And you're absolutely right, because that's what the Maker is banking on. A war of attrition, a war of overwhelming odds, because the Maker himself hasn't really even shown up here yet, assuming that he needs to, because when you're fighting the Maker here, you're fighting a whole city. The very air you breathe is poison. One does not simply walk into the city. I know some of you guys were thinking Lord of the Rings when I said that, and it's true, right? Because Dr. Doom says, what was the composition of that cosmic energy, America? And she says, it doesn't matter. The Maker adapts instantly and cannot be defeated the same way twice. All I did was buy us a moment of time. And that's where Peter chimes in. He says, look, what happened back there with your dad, he left you no choice. It was not your fault, Tony. And speaking as a father, I am telling you, it was his. But I have family too, and I have not been a great husband or a great father lately. I have to get back to them. I have to make it up to them. So snap out of it so we can escape out of here, because Tony's their only real way out. And that's what's so crazy, because everybody's funneling in, right? The Maker's forces are funneling in, everybody's loading into this place, and time stops instantly. It just freezes. And in that moment, Peter's looking up and just asks, is that you, right? Tony, are you the one who did this? And that's where somebody comes out of nowhere and just says, now that is a complicated question, only for us to find out Kang the Conqueror has arrived on the scene. Now, at that point, you jump back to the Ultimate X-Men. And it's one of the things that's said by Canon, right? Like, we've been searching for hours, right? May, we have to rest. And that's where May asks, right? How can we rest when armor is here and potentially even hurt? But that's where Canon just says, I have not found a trace of her. There's nothing to indicate she is here. Not only that, right? Now you have forces on the outside who are trying to destroy the wall to the city. And that's where the Maker kind of chimes in. He can influence, but cannot directly control anything outside of the immediate sphere of influence. These guys turn their weapons on the Ultimate X-Men, right? Mutants, free in the world. My, how things have changed. No matter, your genetic material will be a useful addition, because for the most part, it's one of the very few things he wasn't really able to get his hands on in a large, meaningful way. Now, a lot of that's because the Maker didn't necessarily need to, and he wasn't overly focusing on that. The Maker's defeat did not come as expected, right? The Maker intended to show up in this world, mess around with the time stream, change things like Peter Parker never becoming Spider-Man, and then just kind of ruling the whole place with an iron fist. But when it came to Howard Stark, when it came to Dr. Doom, these guys turning against the Maker, ultimately it led to him being momentarily defeated. And so what this is a scenario where now you have, I wouldn't call them unexpected powers, but a kind of element that the Maker didn't necessarily count on per se. And that's when he starts analyzing all of them, right? Weather manipulation, regeneration, energy blast, telepathy. One whiff is all I need to know everything that you're capable of and to develop counter mechanisms. But don't be afraid, be honored. You are about to become something so much bigger than yourself. And where they momentarily get the upper hand, they're all obliterated. And it turns out that these forces are destroyed by Eric Killmonger. Now, here's the kicker about Eric Killmonger and all of this, and it's one of these things where fans are a little on the fence, right? Where they're just kind of like, don't really know how I feel about it. A lot of people expected Black Panther to play a far more significant role than what we've been seeing in Ultimate Endgame. The fact that he hasn't has been a little bit of a shock to Marvel fans, especially considering how active he was within the Black Panther comic. More so than that, though, while you could debate his activity within the comic, the reality is that this is a massive crossover event. Black Panther not being a major focal part of it seems to kind of rub people the wrong way. But at the same time, the entire billing of Eric Killmonger within the Ultimate Universe so far has been that he's a freedom fighter. So it actually kind of makes more sense that Black Panther would stay within Wakanda, try to keep the place protected, and that Eric Killmonger would be the one to come out here and do fighting. Now, I also imagine it's because of the fact that with all this kind of being written in a way that seemingly took place after Marvel's announcement, kind of the surprise announcement to various writers that they were getting rid of the Ultimate Universe, there's a little bit of adjustment being done on the fly. So it was probably the original intention to build up Eric Killmonger as kind of being the hand of Black Panther, and the stories would focus mostly on him, and that's why we're getting things the way they are now. I'm not going to swear to that. I really haven't seen any interviews from Dennis Camp, but the fact is, right, May sees Eric Killmonger and freaks, right, like, oh my god, like, I'm such a big fan. Is Storm here, right? Can you introduce me? Have you seen your friend? Can you help us? It's all just like running out of her mouth. It's just like one giant run-on sentence. It's so cool to see, to be honest with you guys. This is one of the reasons why Ultimate X-Men has been so awesome. But at that point, you jump back into the city itself and you pick up with Spider-Man, right? What's going on? Why is everything frozen? And Kang just says, call it a temporal tourniquet. I tied off the flow of time around us in order for us to talk. So literally, he's basically created a time bubble. But one of the things he says is, do not get comfortable, Ultimates. The Maker will find some way to slip through or around it and to evolve past it. This is not permanent because the Maker always does this. And that's when you pick up with the version of the Maker that's in Doctor Doom's head. Because it's one of the things to keep in mind, right? When Maker originally screwed with Reed Richards, he left behind a kind of memory fragment of himself. Now, it's only been recently that we figured that out, but he whispers in the ears of Doom and seemingly controls Doom. I don't know if I would call it mind control per se, but a very powerful form of suggestion, right, is really what we could call it. And you'll see why I say that here in a second, because the Maker tells him, first Howard, now him. All my enemies delivered to me. Good boy, Doom, hold him here. And so in that moment, Doom asks, who are you, right? He's buying time. And the Maker actually kind of taunts Doom and is like, you don't know, right? Perhaps I removed too much brain matter because the Reed that I know would have figured it out by now. And Kang just says, all of this is just how I remember it. Every detail. You do not have much time left, and there's still a lot to do. So let me clear the air. I am the last king of everything, the ultimate victor. I live to the end of existence. A few million years from now, they will give me the title of Kang, and it will stick. And in fact, he says, it is one of the universe's first words from the first spoken language. Roughly translated, it means all-conqueror. But please, my friends, just call me Tony. Now, a lot of you guys called this. Full transparency here. A lot of you guys called this. A lot of you guys said this is 100% Tony Stark. There's no way it's not Tony Stark. We didn't know definitively, but now we do. And that's where Doom is like, there's no way it's Tony. And even Peter's just kind of like, everybody's got an evil double but me, unless Venom is my evil double. And Venom's just like, hey, I'm not evil. But Kang continues on. We have had this conversation an infinite number of times, but the look on your face never gets old, Doom. And so that's where Chavez just says, whatever this is, do not listen. That is not Tony, right? Tony is right here. And she kind of begs, right? Tony, come back to us. And she realizes he's in some kind of fugue state. But Kang just says, right, he will be fine. He just needs time to process. Trust me. And so Maker, chiming into the ear of Doom, says, with 2 Immortus engines, I could really start thinking big. There would be no limit to my expansion. Keep him talking, Doom. I am on my way. Because remember, the Maker having the Immortus engine, or an Immortus engine at all, would allow him to rewrite all of reality again and correct any mistakes he made. And given all the lengths he went to transform this universe, you can bet your bottom dollar this guy will fix every mistake, right? That is something he will most assuredly do. And so Doom asked the question, why would we trust you? And the response of Kang, because you trust him. You trust Tony. And he says, and I'm just him with a few billion years under his belt. I'm the same guy. And even Peter's just kind of like billions of years, right? You look exactly the same. And Kang just says, right, I am eternally trapped in the moment just before my first death. So I'll just never grow old. And Peter's like, you know, like Peter Pan. And Kang's just like a god, which is a much better response. And so America, in seeing this, asks, have you come back to help us kill the Maker? And the response of Kang, no, right? I would like nothing more But no, that is not how it happens. And so Doom asks the question, right? What do you mean by that? Isn't how it's supposed to happen? But the Maker is continually making his escape here. And so that's where Kang says, all of it, everything, the whole futile struggle, our great and total failure, your tragic, gruesome deaths. And that's where Peter's just like, wait a minute. Gruesome deaths. And the Maker just says, now, while he's distracted, disable him, but do not damage the engine. And that's where Kang just says, all of this is history. Everything is happening exactly as it's supposed to, because the Maker tells Doom to shoot, which he fires, hits Kang in the chest, and damages the Immortus engine. And at that point, the Maker's just like, you imbecile, right? You hit the engine. You were not supposed to do that. You have failed again. But he says, one time machine will have to do. I will kill Tony Stark. I will take his. I will rewrite history, and the day will be won. And so that's where America Chavez says, time is moving normally again. We will be dead in minutes. What were you thinking, Doom? And Doom just says, our objective is to kill the Maker. Whoever that was, Kang or Tony, refused to help. Either he was an agent of the Maker sent to sow confusion, or he was a distraction. In either case, he is a danger to our purpose. And that's where Peter asks, right? How does being dead help with that? And that's where Kang kind of mentions his last words, just as it's supposed to. Because in that moment, the Maker arrives on the scene, and literally they say, are the buildings bending around it? And Dr. Doom says, no, reality is bending around it. Try to remain calm. In effect, the Maker is bending reality in the here and now. It's kind of nuts, right? And that's where Spider-Man's like, so you just shot the only edge that we had here, right? And Doom just tells him, I don't think so. Whatever else he was, I think Kang was right about Tony. He has not been in a coma. He's been calculating, and I believe he is nearing a solution. And so the Maker just says, give me the boy's heart, and your fate will be terrible, but finite. Oppose me, and your suffering will be unending. And so in that moment, Tony comes to, fires off a repulsor shot, and just says, sorry to scare you, everyone. I'm okay. Temporal mechanics was never my strong suit, but I think I'm getting the hang of it. And so the Maker just says, I made you, and I made all of you. You exist because of me. All of this is my design. And that's where Venom just says, Peter, something's wrong. And the Maker says, Picotech, ancient technology, but brutal. Skin, 1 trillion tiny molecular razor blades. And he says, he was you. Your whole wasted life is in here. Do you ever wonder why you were number 1 on the list? Do you wonder about your special destiny? Do you wonder what it means? Let me tell you, nothing. It means absolutely nothing. And the Maker, in remaking the Venom Picotech suit and combining it with Spider-Man's existing suit, turns himself into Carnage. There was no significance to the order. You are not special. You are a box on a to-do list. You left your family for nothing, wasted your last years with them for nothing. And where Spider-Man cusses at him, right? Peter literally swears at this guy. In that moment, Maker says, you died for nothing, and kills Peter Parker on the spot. Spider-Man's dead. Right? You see why I didn't want to spoil this, right? Son, as soon as I read this, I was just like, they killed Ultimate Spider-Man? Now here's the thing. This is the thing that's driving people nuts across social media, because some people are saying this is like Dennis Camp's and Marvel's cheap attempt to duplicate what happened in the Ultimate Universe, the original Ultimate Universe, but there are people out there who were saying, do we know he's actually dead? Peter Parker's been stabbed before. None of this is new, right? But in this moment, by all standards of measurement, he's dead. And that's where Tony Stark is like, you killed Spider-Man, right? And the Maker just says, it was always leading to this, Parker. I think deep down, you knew that. And he says, the carnage, isn't it beautiful? And so that's where you switch over to Mary Jane Watson and to Richard, right? And Richard asks, Mom, are you okay? And she says, of course, I was just getting some air. Why? And he says, because it's 4 a.m. and I heard you crying. Why were you crying? And she says, I'm actually not sure. I didn't really know that I was. I guess I was just lost in the stars. And he says, but Mom, we're underground. There are no stars down here. And that's when you switch over to a letter written by Peter Parker to Mary Jane Watson. And this is beautiful. I guarantee it's going to make you cry. He says, if you're reading this, then I am dead. which makes you a widow, which is convenient if you want to run the whole spider-themed superhero thing by yourself. And that's where he apologizes and says, hiding behind humor has always been my thing, as you're too well aware. What is it Richard says? The worse the situation, the worse the jokes. I should probably see a therapist about it, but I guess that ship has sailed. It feels like there's so much left unsaid between us, even more left undone, more than could ever fit into 1,000 letters, more than all the words in all the languages. I wish we'd had more time, and I thought there would be more time. It's just not fair. None of this is fair, which I guess was the whole point of everything. I am screwing this up already because I'm no writer. I'm a photographer. I speak in images, not words. I look back on our life and I see a series of still shots, each one perfectly, imperfectly composed. And that's what I'm thinking about now. Richard at 2 years old, terrified, screaming in the arms of a false mall Santa. May, about 1 year old, dancing awkwardly to a terrible pop song that I can't remember. Her face, a study of concentration. The first time May met a dog, the dog licking her fingers as she squeals with delight. Richard was born, drinking at your breast, the inexplicable light that came from you both. And I'm thinking about all the photos that I'll never get to take, but would have loved to. Richard's wedding, moving May into her dorm for her first day of college, a series of photos watching you grow older and more beautiful. Each line on your face, a story. Christmas with the grandkids, and we are so many, we struggle to squeeze into the frame. Maybe it was all a mistake. Maybe I should have squashed that spider with my shoe and thrown that damn box in the trash and quit my job and lived out the last 2 years in some tropical paradise with you and the kids. Maybe it was stupid to think that I could make a difference, or just selfish. 2 years. Some destiny, all in, a pretty underwhelming career for your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I have written letters for the kids. They're not much, but I hope that you will give them to them. I want you to remember me, but I want them to move on too. All of you. I never wanted them to lose a parent. I'm sensitive to it for obvious reasons, but if it had to be one of us, I'm glad it's me. You were always the strong one. I could not go on without you, but you can, you will, for Richard and May, you will. You have your whole lives ahead of you, and I want you to know that whatever you become, it's okay. I will be proud of you so long as you love the kids and love yourself. I will be proud of you. Do not let me or the memory of me hold you back. I release you. I hit the jackpot, MJ. I didn't need you to tell me. I knew from the moment I laid eyes on you. And every year, every prize just got bigger and bigger. Waking up was winning the lottery. Every day. You and me against the world. Always. God, it's almost bringing me to tears. It's a phenomenal letter, right? This is how it ends. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. One of the greatest single comics that I think I've ever read. I think we still have 2 more issues. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.